Hi, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of our not so new now new show called The Stephen and Oliver Show. We are really happy with the early responses on it. So, episode 5 now, the ball's rolling and the name's out there. Everybody seems to be enjoying it, but we took some feedback and we've changed the room back to the layout that we had before. At very great expense. I had to get more boards, which was very annoying. But thank you to Display Pro Limited in Norwich. A little plug for you guys. Did a great job with the display boards. And Emma Piper for all the graphic work. So they're an unusual but necessary plug and thank you to those guys for doing it. So this week we've got an interesting one that again comes up a lot for us when we're working with individual clients, but also in particular businesses. And we're calling it the divided generation. And what we're meaning thereby is all the various different generations. And now if you're watching this on video, I'm going to cheat. I have a bit of paper, which you can probably hear on the podcast. And we're talking about Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, the post-war, and probably that will do. But also, up and coming, there's new generations that are going to be coming through into the workplace soon, which is Gen Alpha, which I have down here as 2010 to 2024. And then in the not-too-distant future, planning ahead, Gen Beta, but I don't think we need to worry about them quite yet. I don't think they'll be clients of ours. Hopefully we'll be retired before they come round. But anyway, the point of it is there is a very big disparity between different generational types and what motivates them. And I think that we were talking off air before recording. The perfect one I would talk about is the difference between a boomer generation that might still be the age of people owning a business, who might be employing Gen Z members of staff. There is a big gap normally between what a boomer generation will think about how you should be remunerated, how you should work, standards and targets, and what somebody from a Gen Z generation is coming through thinking. So I thought it'd be quite good for us to back and forth over that and just open people's eyes to stuff if they weren't aware of it, or bring it back to the centre of their thinking if it's a struggle that they're finding on a daily basis. So when I think about divided generations, I have my ideas, but Stephen, you first. What do you think about divided generations?
It's such an interesting topic, and one that I think will divide the nation, because what you're talking about is because of what you're born into and your exposure and what you see, it changes the way that you think. And one of the words I'm going to use which is a word that you hate, which is expectation. And I think what we're talking about here is the expectations of the different generational types has a huge impact on how they think, how they deliver, what's important to them, and how they do it. And if we don't get that right as employers, as owners of businesses, as you said, the boomers are probably owning businesses now. Gen Z and millennials are working for boomers. If you're not in tune with those two generations in terms of how they think, how they go about things, what's important to them, then actually you're not going to deliver their needs. You're not going to be able to tap into giving them the right environment for them to flourish in. And if you think about it, what it directly impacts is the productivity, what you're getting out of those individuals. And I've definitely seen in the last few years, sort of post the pandemic, that it's definitely changed the way in which those generations act. I also think it has closed the gap a little bit. So people are, talking about well-being. I mean, I remember well-being was like, what's that all about?
What's that fluffy nonsense?
Pre-pandemic, where I think now we're actually talking about it. But I think it's the delivery thing for me and the expectation. And I'll give you an example where I've really seen it, in every day is in recruitment. If you think about how much recruitment has changed in terms of when you're going out into the marketplace to get someone, their expectations, because of the different generations, has completely changed. They're sat there going, hold on a minute, what can you do for me? I'm sat here and you're interviewing me, but I'm looking at you going, well, what can you do for me? Is this environment going to be good enough? What are your policies? I've actually heard someone go, well, can you tell me whether you've got a discrimination policy or whether you've got a disability policy? because I want, I want to see what that looks like. That would have never have come up in an interview for a boomer generation. Wouldn't even be on the agenda.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm talking about, and it'll be great with this podcast for us just to shed some light on what we think you can do to reduce that generational gap, because it will become a issue. And then when we go on to the alphas, they're going to be so many generations removed from the boomers. Boomers are going to be then great grandparents and grandparents. So, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really interesting, because that's the next, I wouldn't call it emergency, it's a little dramatic, Oliver, but it's the next challenge that's coming, because the Gen Alpha generation, from my research, if you correct me if I'm wrong, is people born from 2010 to 2024. So the 2010 ones are potentially only 4 years, maybe less, away from being in the workplace in some way, shape or form. And they have very different views, having completely different skill sets as well. But it's so interesting that we talk about it. So Gen X, which is like that 1965 to 1980, he says, glancing at his piece of paper. I'm even seeing challenges in that regard as well, because they are right in the middle of it, because they are the younger entrepreneurs in the main. Well, that's not strictly true, but in a lot of them are certainly coming up to partner level now, or maybe director level, or perhaps they've moved away from being employed and running their own business, whatever it might be. And they're a little bit aware of the boomer way, because that's how they've been brought up by their parents, but they're also very aware because they've probably got kids in many cases, or know of kids, or have friends who have kids of the ages of millennials and maybe even Gen Z. So they are in a real bind, because how do you communicate successfully to all of them? And I honestly believe the answer is very clear, is not forgetting the Gen Xers and the boomers at all, but if you provide what the younger generations need, you'll be surprised at how much benefit it will be to the older generations. Because I think what you were alluding to there with certainly the millennials and Gen Z is this need for purpose. Why am I coming here? I'm going to spend a lot of my time at work. Now, I always think about my father-in-law, who's in his 70s now, and he says, honest days pay for an honest day's work. No, that's not the thing anymore. It's not about just work hard and the rewards will come. There's got to be something in it for people. And it doesn't really matter how much the Gen Xers and boomers don't like it. Yeah. That is the growing consensus of the workforce. They're not going to come in and be bored out of their minds for any period of time. So if you do recruit in that way and you continue down that path, you will be going through the conveyor belt of staff quite regularly. And I think it's only going to get worse, because the Gen Z are fairly up on this, but certainly alphas will be so technically advanced.
Yes.
Compared to a large percentage of the Gen Xers and boomers, and maybe even the millennials, you can get left behind.
And you know what, Oliver, the thing that just came in my mind, actually, I was just in a meeting with a Gen Z, and what was quite interesting was the speed in which they receive information. And the speed in which they then output that information is where I think a huge amount of frustration comes from. They're thinking, they're consuming things at such a speed, which I think is where the issue is going to come from.
Yeah,
and that's where the frustration comes from. And I think it's one of the words I would use is patience. One of the words I would use is actually doing more due diligence, doing more research, understanding things a little bit more from lots of different perspectives. And let's be honest, that word pops up again, doesn't it? Inclusion. Because what we're actually talking about, Oliver, yes, we're talking about the different generations, but actually what we're saying is, if you have a business ethos and the values are in such a way that it supports inclusion, what happens is everyone feels like they're part of it. Yes, we're talking about generations, but actually we're talking about inclusion here, right? We're talking about, what do you need to do as a business to make sure that you are delivering for everyone in that organization? How much time are you spending with the various individuals, to really get to know them, to build that relationship, to understand what makes them tick, to understand what's important to them. And I think we've become lazy, Oliver. I actually think, and this is me, I might be speaking generally here and generalizing, but I do think we've become quite lazy because information is ready available and it's all there and everything's very quick. We've actually forgotten the skill of taking our time, getting to know people, asking more questions, How, again, it spits in the eye of, actually, if we ask more questions, we'll get to know people, we'll get to know more about how the different generations are affected and how we can best serve them. So actually, I would actually say, yes, we're talking about generational divides and differences, but actually, we're talking about inclusion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And communication, and certainly in the business environment, not so much on the one-on-one, it's it's culture again. It comes back to that. I mean, I don't love calling it culture, but I mean it's a name that most people will accept what that is, isn't it? And that's all around communication. And I can think right now live of 2 client sets that I've got that obviously will remain nameless, that are massively screwing this up right now. One is taking action, the other one is absolutely digging its heels in. I think the first one I'm going to talk about is probably in the Gen X, might just be a boomer. They're right on the edge of it anyway. And they will not do any form of engagement survey. And I know the reason why they won't do it, because they know the feedback will be absolutely, excuse my French, shit. But it needs to be heard. They have over 120 staff. Most of them aren't very happy, and they need to hear it. And they need to hear it honestly. They need to hear it anonymously so that people feel safe. And then they need to feedback what they've heard. They need to feedback how they're going to address it. They're then going to feedback that they will ask them again as staff within 6 to 12 months what they've noticed in terms of the change, and they've got to communicate, because their group of their staff are just getting younger and younger and younger, and you cannot just tell them this is how it is, not when you've got that many staff. The other one is a much smaller family-run business where we have an issue where there's been 20 years of very successful business from the Gen X boomer led business, but it needs to adapt. The young Gen Z is probably a millennial, is quite frustrated with the pace of play, but they're not respectful of what's gone before. Yeah, there's been 20 years of success that needs to be acknowledged. Flip side, because they won't acknowledge the boomer Gen X founder of the business is really reticent towards change because the communication is lacking. Now, I will get them in a room, and in no time at all I will fix that, because I have heard them speak to me individually about how well they think of each other, and it's a father-son situation. That will change everything, because what they just don't want to do, the typical family issue, they're not prepared to say the things that they will say about each other to separate people. That will fix it, and then I can hear within the founder of the company willingness to change, and I can hear respect for the past from the younger generation moving on. So there's hope for that. The other business is absolutely shagged. It's totally screwed, because it's just going to lose all its good people. And it comes from this position of, no, this is how it is. Well, that doesn't work anymore. There's no way millennials and Gen Zs and alphas to come are going to accept that. And they will run a mile, and that will become a toxic reputation that business has. It will just mean it is untouchable. No one will go. I don't know. That seems extreme to me, actually, but I think it's also quite simple. But do you agree, disagree, challenge?
I think it's about adapting. And I think you are right in that if we believe that what's gone before is always right and we don't challenge it, then that becomes a problem. So I do think it's about that challenge. I also think there's an issue with knowledge transfer. So one of the things I talk a lot about is, how do you, because let's be honest, in some industries, that knowledge is really important. That knowledge that, the boomers might have is critical. It's how do you do the knowledge transfer? And unfortunately, we still get people where you can't see if you're listening, but if you can see the video, where they're putting their arm around the data or the information and they don't want to share it. And I think that it's the knowledge transfer that needs to be really important. And then I think it's about the younger generations being able to listen to that knowledge transfer and work their own way around it. I just think sometimes there's a nervousness about the knowledge transfer, and then there's almost like, well, you've got nothing to teach us. But it takes time, it takes investment, it takes system upgrades. So the other thing I've seen, and one business that I work with, their system is completely fucked. It's the only way to put it. So they can't employ new people because the new people are like, what's this? Like, this is just broken beyond belief. So then the productivity is rubbish. So I think there is a need to update some of the systems and procedures in order then you have much more fluidity and much more flexibility.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely at the heart of some of the issues. And actually, if you don't address that now, you could get to a point where you will not be able to employ anyone. You will not be able to employ anyone because they'll be just like going, well, this doesn't work. We don't have the knowledge to use that system because it's not updated enough. It's a little bit like, let's put it in today's terms. It's a little bit like not updating your phone when the new software comes. If you didn't update your phone for four years, right? And there was 3 updates in that time period, your phone now will only be able to run at a certain capacity because you have not upgraded it. And I think that's what we're talking about is businesses need to upgrade. They need to upgrade with their communication. They need to upgrade with the tools that they've got. They need to upgrade in terms of what those conversations look like, upgrade in terms of how deep they go to understanding. And that's the bit I think we're talking about here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's so frustrating as well because what you have is this clash of older generations feeling that they know best and an element of naivety they believe to the younger generations, but the younger generations come in with enthusiasm and good ideas, not always the right ones, but you need to explain why these things won't work or why we need to take some time on it. And there is a nice natural marriage here somewhere if we can get that communication piece. And when you look at the successful businesses that we've worked with or that you just observe from a distance, they don't have this problem. Age isn't a barrier in any way, shape or form because you just respect the individual.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe we're almost partly responsible by getting so hung up on generations and so forth because you're sort of pigeonholing people and boxing them. And it just comes down to individuals. It comes down to the ability to communicate effectively amongst those individuals. But I love the analogy of technology because I think it's even more relevant with the generations already coming through, but certainly not far behind. I mean, they are going to be absolutely strides ahead of companies that haven't got all the tech in.
Absolutely.
You know, some of the frustrations that I do come across is things like retail company who wasn't using their EPOS properly. Drives the younger people mad because they're like, well, why do we keep buying this stuff in? Because it just seems to sit on the shelves. I'm pretty sure if we looked and interrogated the data, we shouldn't be buying this stuff. And in fact, if we interrogated the data far enough, we'd probably find the whole 80-20 principle is in play and we could save ourselves a fortune on wasted stock. And that stuff is, it's so easy now with EPOS systems and with the right EPOS system. And the challenge there is there's a bit of training, isn't there? There's a bit of learning.
Yes.
You've got to change the way you do things. The status quo can't remain, and that's what we come up against. And it's frustrating. Where we're based in Norfolk, I can be honest and say I don't do a lot of work in the area now. I have some long-standing clients that I do, but I don't pick up much new work here because it's infuriating because of the slowness of pace. But I was quite surprised. But now I'm starting working with some national and international companies based in the London area. You get the same problem when the businesses become large. Yeah. Some, not all, because I can't speak for all, but some of the corporates I'm starting to work with, it is unbelievable how much enthusiasm is down with the younger people coming through and want to make change, and the resistance or the barriers or the blockers that are in play that mean that's not possible. And you're like, wow, these guys are not short on cash. They're successful, but even they aren't able to make these changes. So they will run the same risk because these people will leave. And these are talented people that they're going to run the risk of leaving through just frustration, maybe as simply down to their IT systems being out of date. So it's a really big issue, and I don't think enough companies are looking at it from this generational point of view because there is a lot of information out there about this, a lot of data. You can go down some rabbit holes, sure enough. But the point is the people coming through in their 30s and younger, maybe even in their mid-30s and younger, have a different outlook on life to those generally of an older age, and And people like, I'm in my mid-40s, I'm really having to work hard to understand it because it doesn't come naturally to me because I have been educated in a different way. I'm just on the border of the Gen X, literally on the end of the Gen X, the beginning of Millennials, brought up by Boomers. I mean, I've got no chance, have I? I am really up against it. But all joking apart, there's a big conversation around this that I think should be much more front and centre than it is. So
No, yeah, absolutely, Oliver. And I think hopefully listen to this podcast, business owners, even people that are in, working for other people, start to think about the impact and the priorities and what's important. Because that's what we're talking about as well, isn't it? It's what's important to that generation and the impact of that. And if we don't embrace it, we're definitely going to have issues. I can see so many things that will become a real issue. Even the added old question around, why are you writing it down? Like, how many people don't use tech in the right way to help them be, just more in touch with what's going on? There's nothing wrong with writing things down because sometimes it's nice to write things down. But I think it's almost that thing of time and a place, isn't it? It's knowing when and when not.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah.
To make sure that you're getting the best out of everything. But again, bringing this to a bit of a close for me, it's appreciating the different generations are different. One, that what's important to me is different. So there's some work on both sides because there's so much to learn from the past, which is important. But it's getting that knowledge transfer, it's getting that understanding, it's improving communication, it's improving the art of conversation, which I do feel is at the centre of this as well. And we mustn't lose that. I think it's so important in terms of having that art of conversation, so that actually we can deliver things, we can express more things, we can be much more creative, much more collaborative.
Yep.
So all of these things really come to mind for me.
Yeah, no, excellent. I think that's a really good way to wrap it up. I don't think I have any more to add on the subject. So, as always, hopefully this has triggered some thinking from people. If anybody wants to, the rules by now, just get in touch with either me or Stephen and we'll happily talk to you about this. Anybody who's listened to anything on our shows, we're more than happy to come out and have a chat with you with no obligation or anything along those lines. But more importantly, we just hope it stimulates some healthy conversations and some debate. So without any further ado, I will end the episode there. And I believe you'll find the next one will be a Christmas-focused one. So that'll be interesting to see what the hell we're going to talk about on that one, won't it? Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.